If you're looking to get into D&D and want to understand just what a session of the game actually looks like, you may have started like I did by just watching or listening to other people play the game. Shows like Critical Role or Dimension 20 are not only great entry points, they provide a really great example for the rhythm of play. But like myself when I first started, you may have looked at the high production value, the fancy sets, the effortless character acting, and seemingly extensive prep work, and how the game just flows, and felt a bit overwhelmed. Do you really need all of that to run a D&D game? Absolutely not. The reality is my group and I don't have any fancy sets or detailed combat maps. We just play in whoever's living room is available. We aren't professional voice actors, and everyone in our group has differing comfort levels when it comes to roleplay. And like many of you watching this video, we all work a 9 to 5 and struggle to align our busy schedules. We also get distracted. A lot.
Why did you say it like that?
What, he mounts the dragon, like he saddles up.
Settle up.
So Reese gets on his dragon, and
No, you used a different way before. Do it again.
Mounts.
Reese mounts his dragon.
Fuck yeah, he does.
And
With all that out of the way, what does one of our D&D sessions actually look like? And how hard is it to run a game of D&D with a bunch of stinky nerds who love to yap while I'm lore dropping? Today, I'll share with you how I prepare and pace a session, as well as some recent lessons I've learned for player engagement. I'm Kyle, and this is Days of D&D. So for a little context here, the vibe of the game I run with my friends is an Indiana Jones action-adventure type story set in a fantasy world. My session prep starts by looking at 3 things. Number 1, what happened in the last session? Taking significant moments from what happened in the game previously and building upon them for ideas of where to take the main quest and individual character arcs next. Number 2, watching and playing a shit ton of adventure movies and games in order to draw inspiration for set pieces or NPCs the characters might meet, and to capture the classic adventure tone we're all so familiar with. And number 3, consulting the DM guide to make my ideas work within the game systems. I then outline the session structure and create brief profiles for key NPCs, including their backstories, personalities, and appearances. For finishing touches, I create scenes in Opus Describe for ambience, music, and sound effects, and then it's off to the session. Our sessions begin with all of us meeting up at whoever's house is free. I set up any last-minute prep, and we grab some food. We all have an obligatory debate about what to order before finally settling on pizzas as our trusty adventure fuel. After that, we start our game proper, welcoming everyone back to the table with a rundown of any homebrew rules we'll be implementing going forward, a recap of what happened in our last session, as well as anything my players want to address or ideas of how we can make the game more fun for everyone. Speaking of, over the last 4 to 5 weeks we've been playing, there have been a few recurring difficulties affecting the flow of the game and general player engagement that the group and I began to notice. For one, our sessions would kind of go on too long. And while as a DM, I could keep playing for hours, I noticed some of my other players, more often than not, would get fatigued during our sessions that would stretch on into the late hours of the night.
Go to bed.
does it say go to bed?
And never goes to bed.
Sleepy time, Chris.
Next was, as much as D&D is a super cool social thing, despite what some people will tell you, some members of our group were having a hard time hearing what I was saying as the DM, over all the crosstalk and joking around.
Reese does not believe him.
Wait, this wasn't my fault. This is Kitty's fault.
My fault?
It is actually your fault.
It's Blake's
You
fault.
did not help.
It's Blake's
You
fault.
this roll. I fucked this roll. I didn't roll shit.
It's definitely hard on me as a DM as I put time into preparing the sessions, but also happening frequently enough that it was frustrating the players who were really into the story and wanted to hear the crucial lore details that I just said. Adding to the fatigue I mentioned before, combat was definitely dragging as well, with 6 players plus multiple enemies. Some players were taking longer on their turns than others, slowing the game down and causing some of my other players to quietly fall asleep. And last but not least, phones. We were using the D&D Beyond app for our character sheets and dice rolls, which meant that players had them in their hands at all times. Paired with how long combat turns took and player fatigue, they were becoming a real hindrance to player engagement. So I had to think about all of that and talk to my players about what they thought to try and improve everyone's experience. Here's a few things we came up with. Number 1, session timer. I've made a conscious effort since to try to cap our sessions at a 3-hour time limit, with the option presented for players within the last 15 minutes to extend it by another half hour if they so choose. We've started using a clearly visible 3-hour timer, which just lets everyone know how much time we have left and allows me to pace the session effectively. I've learned to get to know what my players' stamina levels are and what they most enjoy doing, or what's really worth that 3-hour time limit, and try to prep my sessions in a way that we build encounters around that. Number 2, table etiquette. At the risk of sounding like your grandma, it's been very important for me to talk to everyone about the etiquette of our sessions and crosstalk, especially when it affects other players' enjoyment of the game. While there's most definitely times in our sessions for jokes and goofing off, as a DM, having the support of my players to tell everyone else when to lock in and listen up has been really helpful. Number 3, combat timer and less enemies. We've introduced a 90-second timer for combat turns, which has helped speed up the flow of fights considerably. But also, as a DM, I've learned that my players enjoy fighting fewer interesting enemies with larger hit points rather than many smaller ones. For one, it's been easier for me to track enemy health and damage and all that jazz, and 2, it also keeps the pace of combat moving back to my players' turns quicker. And finally, we put our phones aside and changed from using D&D Beyond to this really cool thing called pen and paper. And get this, real dice. Not only that, but we've also heavily encouraged players to take notes of NPC names, locations, and what happens during a session, or just to write down their characters' thoughts and motives on paper, which helps so that players always have important information about their character or the main story on hand, and I don't have to do as much of a lengthy recap at the start of a session. At the end of the day, playing D&D doesn't have to be as intimidating as it might seem. I found that all you need is a willingness to learn alongside your players and adapt the game to what gives everyone at your table the most enjoyment. For us, setting clear expectations around timing, table etiquette, combat pace, and distractions has dramatically improved everyone's experience playing the game, and transformed our sessions from meandering marathons into focused and engaging adventures that leave us excited for the next session rather than exhausted. Everyone's game, including yours, will look a little different. Whether you're playing with detailed miniatures and terrain, or theater of the mind around a dining room table, the heart of D&D remains the same. The fun you have with your friends while collaboratively telling stories.